David PREMAC PREMAC and his
A lot of motivational psychology is based on the idea that many people engage in behaviors because we expect a reward for those behaviors, such as going to work only because we expect to get paid. We probably wouldn't work for free, and we engage in behavior because we expect a reward. Psychology says that we have an external or extrinsic motivation for these behaviors. However, at the same time, we also engage in other behaviors simply because we think they're fun, like the behaviors you might do on a day off. We don't expect an external reward, but we just do things just because. We find these behaviors enjoyable, relaxing, and otherwise challenging, so the action of doing the particular activity is the reward in itself. Psychology says that this type of behavior is known as internal or intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is the basis for the PREMAC principle. In the 1950s and 60s, PREMAC became interested in studying internal motivations for behaviors. He argued that when you consider all the possible behaviors one might do, such as what you might do in your free time, you could rank your preference for each behavior in order, and it would depend on the personality and the needs of the individual at the time. Let's, for example, say someone chooses to read a book during their free time, while someone else wants to watch a movie instead. If reading a book is that particular individual's favorite activity, he might naturally choose to read. But at the same time, if you just read a long book, you might want to take a break and do something else, like go for a run. Our intrinsic motivation for a particular behavior, like reading a book, is dependent on the situation, our mood, or what we've been doing recently. Most individuals don't consciously rank which behaviors they prefer. But that said, PREMAC, from his studies, deduced that if an external observer viewed another person's life, the behavior that occurs most often can be deduced to be high probability behaviors. And they, therefore, more than likely, reflect the underlying behaviors of that individual as a whole. Let's try and recap this with a simple example. Say that a teacher is observing her student Miguel during recess over the period of a month. Miguel makes sure that he spends at least 5 minutes at recess playing on the slides. He only plays with the basketball for a few days in a month, and he only tends to play on the swing about once a month, and that's just for a few minutes, and before he moves on to something else during recess. If we were to apply PREMAC's principle or analysis towards this particular example, we would understand that Miguel's intrinsic motivation for each activity could be ranked by observing the amount of time he spends on each particular activity, therefore determine its probability. The most common activity, as we observed, was him playing on the slide. And if we asked Miguel about his favorite thing to do at recess, he would likely say it was playing on the slide. On the other side, Miguel's least favorite activity, as we noticed, was playing on the swings, and we know this because he rarely played on the swings. And we can determine from this that Miguel's high probability behavior is to play on the slide, and low probability behavior is to play on the swings. Previously suggested ideas ended up contributing to what is now known as the PREMAC principle. The PREMAC principle is centered around the idea of reinforcement. Reinforcement is defined as a process of encouraging response by using a reinforcer. A reinforcer is defined as a stimulus, such as a reward or a punishment, that in operant conditions maintains or strengthens a desired response. Reinforcers are measured by their effects on our behavior. Unfortunately, we have no means to understand what reinforcer can motivate or ultimately encourage some form of behavior modification in an individual, as the particular individual's tastes and response to stimuli, i.e. reinforcer, may vary. For example, a dog's tasty treat might, lead him to do a new command. However, the same tasty treat on a full stomach would be ineffective because the dog has a full stomach. PREMAC essentially challenged the traditional train of thought, and its principle is based on the notion that reinforcers can be viewed as behaviors rather than stimuli. Traditionally, we would say that a bad habit was reinforced by a television, which is considered a stimuli. Using PREMAC's train of thought, we would say that the bad habit was instead reinforced by watching television, which is considered a behavior rather than just a stimuli. Furthermore, PREMAC's principle differentiates between high probability behavior and low probability behavior, just like we explored in Miguel's example earlier on. PREMAC states that high probability behavior can be used to reinforce a low probability behavior. Explore this visual diagram, which goes on the high probability and low probability behavior in a little bit more detail. When a rat is thirsty, drinking water has a high likelihood of occurrence than running on a wheel. This means that drinking water, the high probability behavior, can be used to reinforce the target behavior of running on the wheel, which is considered low probability behavior because the rat essentially doesn't want to do it. In other words, the rat will run on the wheel to obtain access to the water. That's how it works. By focusing on the relative properties of behavior, the PREMAC principle allows us to quickly identify potential reinforcers in the real world and pick out people's intrinsic motivations. The principle also suggests that we could use these positive or otherwise enjoyable, what we call high probability intrinsic motivations, and use them as a reward for completing unenjoyable or low probability behaviors and activities. To give you an example, if a child spends only a few minutes each morning doing chores, but at least half an hour reading comic books, then the opportunity to read comic books, which is considered high probability behavior, can be used as a treat for doing chores, which is what parents generally do.
The PREMAC principle states that preferred behaviors can be used as a reward for less preferred behaviors. An example of this would be telling a child that they can have dessert after they finish eating their vegetables. The dessert would be the preferred behavior, and eating the vegetables would be the less preferred behavior. By doing this, it is giving the child more incentive to eat their vegetables. By using the dessert as motivation, the child would be much more willing to eat their vegetables. This principle can create a win-win situation for everyone involved. You can get your child to do what you want them to do, and if they do in fact do it, they get what they want as a reward. This principle can be very useful. It is not only useful in motivating children, but also in training dogs. Using this principle, you can train your dog by giving him rewards after he accomplishes what you want him to do. An example of this would be if you were walking your dog in the park, they were to see a squirrel, and then they start to pull on the leash. You want him to stop pulling, so you stop and wait, and when he finally stops pulling, you can then reward him. So it is very effective in training a dog and getting them to do what you want them to do. Not only is it an effective principle for everyday use, but it is also used by therapists in behavior modification. Behavior modification is to increase or decrease the frequency of behaviors, such as altering an individual's behaviors and reactions to stimuli through positive and negative reinforcement of adaptive behavior.